Within a week of the story breaking, James found himself at the center of a media phenomenon that extended far beyond anything he could have imagined. Letters began arriving at his barracks from people across the United Kingdom and even from other countries, all expressing admiration for his principled stand and thanking him for representing the best values of service and integrity. One letter that particularly moved James came from an elderly veteran who had served in World War II. The man wrote that James's response reminded him of the kind of character that had once defined military service, and that seeing such integrity in a young person gave him hope for the future. Another letter came from a teacher who said she was using James's story as an example for her students about the importance of standing up for one's principles, even when it might be easier to compromise. The story had also caught the attention of international media outlets. News organizations in the United States, Canada, Australia, and other Commonwealth nations picked up the story, often using it as an example of the positive traditions and values that the British monarchy continued to represent. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on both James's character and Queen Camilla's wisdom in recognizing and encouraging integrity. However, the most significant development came exactly 1 week after the original incident. James was informed by his commanding officer that he had been requested to appear at Buckingham Palace for a special ceremony. Initially, James assumed this would be a formal commendation or perhaps a brief meeting with senior military officials. He could never have anticipated what actually awaited him. On the appointed day, James arrived at Buckingham Palace in his dress uniform, having spent extra time ensuring every detail was perfect. He was escorted through the magnificent halls by palace staff who treated him with particular courtesy and respect. The grandeur of the palace was overwhelming, but James focused on maintaining his military bearing and composure. He was led to the 1844 room, one of the palace's most elegant reception rooms, where he was told to wait. After a few minutes, the doors opened, and, to his complete surprise, both King Charles and Queen Camilla entered the room together. James immediately came to attention and offered a perfect military salute. King Charles approached him with a warm smile and extended his hand. "James Mitchell," the king said, "it is a pleasure to meet the young man who has reminded us all what integrity looks like in action." "Your Majesty," James replied, barely able to believe he was speaking directly with the king. Queen Camilla stepped forward with an equally warm smile. "James, I hope you haven't been too overwhelmed by all the attention your response has generated." "No, Your Majesty, though I admit it has been quite unexpected." King Charles chuckled. "I imagine it has been. But what you may not realize is that your response has had an impact far beyond the immediate moment. The story of your exchange with my wife has reached people around the world, and the reaction has been truly remarkable." The king gestured for James to sit, and this time, being off duty and in the presence of royalty in a formal setting, James gratefully accepted the invitation. "Tell me," King Charles continued, "when you made the decision to respectfully decline my wife's suggestion that you sit down, what was going through your mind?" James thought carefully before answering. "Your Majesty, I was thinking about my oath of service and about my grandmother, who taught me the importance of doing what is right even when it is difficult. I felt that sitting down, even with permission, would compromise the trust that has been placed in me as a member of the Queen's Guard." Queen Camilla nodded approvingly. "That is exactly what I hoped you would say. You see, James, my suggestion that you sit down was not really about your comfort, though I was genuinely concerned about you standing for so long. It was a test of character, and you passed that test with flying colors." James looked surprised. "A test, Your Majesty?" "Indeed," King Charles explained. "Throughout history, there have been moments when individuals in positions of service have been faced with choices that reveal their true character. Sometimes these choices involve great danger or obvious moral dilemmas. But sometimes, as in your case, they involve much subtler questions of duty and principle. The easy thing to do," Queen Camilla added, "would have been to gratefully accept my suggestion and sit down. After all, you had been given permission by someone in authority. But the right thing to do was to politely decline and maintain your post, which you did with perfect respect and grace." King Charles reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "James, Your response has brought honor not only to yourself and your family, but to the entire institution of the monarchy and to the military traditions of our nation. For this reason, I am pleased to present you with the Royal Victorian Medal, which recognizes distinguished personal service to the crown." James felt overwhelmed with emotion as the king opened the box to reveal the beautiful silver medal. The Royal Victorian Medal was a prestigious honor that recognized exceptional personal service to the monarch, and James had never dreamed he might be worthy of such recognition. "Your Majesty, I am deeply honored, but I was only doing my duty." "Precisely," Queen Camilla said with a smile. "You were doing your duty in the most exemplary way possible. That is exactly why this recognition is so well-deserved." The king pinned the medal to James's uniform as Queen Camilla watched with obvious satisfaction. "James," the king said, "I want you to know that your story has already inspired countless people, and I have no doubt it will continue to do so for years to come. You have demonstrated that integrity and principle are not old-fashioned concepts, but timeless values that remain as relevant today as they have ever been." After the ceremony, James was invited to join the king and queen for tea, during which they discussed his background, his aspirations, and his experiences as a member of the Queen's Guard. They were genuinely interested in his perspectives and treated him not as a subordinate, but as a respected individual whose opinions and experiences mattered. As the visit concluded, Queen Camilla made one final comment that would stay with James for the rest of his life. "James, remember that true leadership and true service are not about rank or position. They are about character and integrity. You have both in abundance, and I expect great things from you in whatever path you choose to follow." When James returned to his barracks that evening, he found that news of his award had already reached his fellow guards. They welcomed him back with genuine congratulations and respect, recognizing that his honor reflected well on all of them. Over the following weeks, the impact of James's story continued to grow. Military academies began using his response as a case study in ethical decision-making. Schools incorporated his story into character education programs. The story became a favorite example in discussions about the importance of maintaining principles under pressure. James's parents, who had watched their son's journey with pride and amazement, were invited to several events where their son was honored. His mother later said that seeing James receive recognition from the king and queen was beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible for her family. The young guard himself handled the attention with the same humility and grace he had shown during his exchange with Queen Camilla. He continued to serve with distinction, always remembering the lesson that had brought him such recognition. Sometimes the greatest honor comes not from doing what is easy or convenient, but from doing what is right, regardless of the circumstances. Years later, James would go on to have a distinguished military career, eventually becoming an officer and then pursuing a successful career in public service. Throughout his life, he would often be asked about that autumn morning when Queen Camilla told him to sit down, and he respectfully declined. His standard response would always be the same. "I was simply doing what my grandmother taught me to do, what my training prepared me to do, and what my conscience told me was right." The royal honor belongs to Queen Camilla, who had the wisdom to test my character and the grace to recognize it when I passed the test. The story of James Mitchell and Queen Camilla became more than just a news item or a feel-good story. It became a reminder that in an age of rapid change and shifting values, the fundamental principles of duty, integrity, and respectful service remain as important as ever. It demonstrated that both the monarchy and the military continue to attract and develop people of exceptional character, and that these institutions remain worthy of public respect and support. Most importantly, it showed that individual moments of choice, however small they might seem at the time, can have profound impacts that extend far beyond their immediate circumstances. James's decision to politely but firmly maintain his post that autumn morning had rippled outward, touching lives and inspiring people in ways he could never have anticipated. The guard who said no to the Queen had actually said yes to something much more important. He had said yes to his principles, his integrity, and his understanding of what true service really means. In doing so, he had not only stunned the nation but had reminded everyone who heard his story of the timeless value of doing what is right, even when it might be easier to do otherwise. James looked directly at Queen Camilla with respectful but unwavering eyes, his voice clear and steady as he delivered his response. "Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, I cannot sit down while on duty. My oath to serve and protect requires me to remain at my post. However, I am deeply honored by your concern for my well-being." The words came out more confidently than James had expected. He had chosen to address the Queen with complete honesty while maintaining the utmost respect for her position. His response demonstrated both his commitment to his duty and his appreciation for her thoughtfulness. Queen Camilla stood perfectly still for a moment, her expression unreadable. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how their queen would react to what could be perceived as defiance of a royal command. The security detail remained alert, though they seemed more curious than concerned about the unprecedented exchange. Then, something remarkable happened. A slow smile spread across Queen Camilla's face, and her eyes lit up with what appeared to be genuine delight and admiration. "Well," she said, her voice carrying a note of impressed satisfaction, "that is exactly the kind of answer I was hoping to hear." James felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he maintained his military posture. He had not been certain how his response would be received, but the Queen's reaction suggested he had made the right choice. Queen Camilla turned to her ladies-in-waiting. "This young man understands the true meaning of duty and integrity. He honors both his oath and his queen by refusing to compromise his principles, even when given permission to do so." She then addressed James again. "What is your name, guard?" "James Mitchell, Your Majesty," he replied promptly. "James Mitchell," she repeated thoughtfully. "How long have you served in the Queen's Guard?" 8 months, Your Majesty." Queen Camilla nodded approvingly. 8 months, and you already understand what some people never learn in a lifetime. True respect sometimes requires saying no, even to those in authority, when doing so upholds higher principles. The conversation was attracting attention from other staff members who had paused in their duties to witness this unusual interaction. Word was already beginning to spread throughout the residence that something extraordinary was taking place between the Queen and one of the guards. "Tell me, James," Queen Camilla continued, "where are you from?" "Manchester, Your Majesty. My family still lives there." "And what made you want to join the Queen's Guard?" James hesitated for just a moment, then decided to answer with the same honesty he had shown throughout their conversation. "My grandmother used to bring me to London when I was young, Your Majesty. We would watch the changing of the guard, and she would tell me stories about the history and tradition. She said that being a guard was one of the most honorable ways to serve one's country. She passed away just before I achieved my goal of joining." Queen Camilla's expression softened with genuine emotion. "She sounds like a wise woman. I think she would be very proud of the young man you have become." "Thank you, Your Majesty. That means more to me than I can express." The Queen glanced at her watch and realized that her schedule was becoming delayed, but she seemed reluctant to end the conversation. "James, I want you to know that your response today has reminded me of something very important. In a world where many people are quick to compromise their principles for convenience or advantage, meeting someone who holds firm to their convictions is truly refreshing. I was only doing my duty, Your Majesty." "No," Queen Camilla said firmly. "You were doing much more than that. You were demonstrating character. There is a significant difference." She turned to the senior member of her security detail. "I want this conversation documented and shared with the appropriate people. This young man's response today should be recognized." The security officer nodded and made a note in his logbook. James felt a mixture of pride and anxiety about what this recognition might mean for his future. Queen Camilla looked back at James one final time. "Continue to serve with the same integrity you have shown today, James Mitchell. The Crown is fortunate to have guardsmen like you." "Thank you, Your Majesty. It has been an honor." As the royal party finally continued toward the waiting car, James remained at his post, his mind still processing what had just occurred. He watched as Queen Camilla was escorted to her vehicle, and just before she entered the car, she turned back and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. The car drove away, leaving James alone with his thoughts and the lingering sense that something significant had just taken place. Other guards and staff members who had witnessed the exchange began approaching him with questions and congratulations. But James remained focused on his duties for the remainder of his shift. However, what James did not know was that Queen Camilla's instruction to document the conversation was already setting in motion a series of events that would extend far beyond the grounds of Highgrove House. The senior security officer immediately contacted his superiors, and, within hours, word of the exchange had reached the highest levels of the royal household administration. By evening, a detailed report of the conversation had been prepared and distributed to key officials, including the private secretary to the king, the Lord Chamberlain, and the commanding officers of James's regiment. The report praised both Queen Camilla's wisdom in testing the young guard's character and James's exemplary response under unexpected circumstances. The story began to spread through official channels first, then gradually made its way into conversations among palace staff, military personnel, and, eventually, members of the media who had contacts within royal circles. What had started as a simple conversation between a queen and a guard was becoming something much larger. Within 48 hours, a journalist from a respected newspaper had learned about the incident and began investigating the details. The journalist, Sarah Williams, was known for her thoughtful reporting on royal affairs and had built a reputation for accuracy and respect in her coverage of the monarchy. Sarah was immediately struck by the human interest aspect of the story. Here was a young man from a working-class background who had achieved his dream of serving in the Queen's Guard, only to find himself in an impossible situation that tested his character in the most profound way. His response had not only impressed the Queen but had also demonstrated the kind of principled thinking that seemed increasingly rare in public life. After verifying the facts through multiple sources and obtaining permission from the appropriate royal authorities, Sarah decided to write a feature article about the incident. She was careful to focus on the positive aspects of the story and to present both James and Queen Camilla in a respectful light. The article was published on a Friday morning under the headline, "The Guard Who Said No. Young Soldier's Principled Response Impresses Queen Camilla." The story captured the public's imagination immediately, and, by afternoon, it was being shared across social media platforms and discussed on news programs throughout the United Kingdom. Public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People were impressed by James's integrity and by Queen Camilla's wisdom in recognizing and acknowledging his character. Many readers commented that the story restored their faith in both the military and the monarchy, showing that both institutions still valued principles over convenience. James, who had been unaware that the story was going to be published, first learned about the article when fellow guards showed him their phones during a break. He was shocked to see his name and photograph in a national newspaper, and initially worried about whether the publicity would affect his career. However, his commanding officers quickly reassured him that the coverage was entirely positive and that his response had brought honor to both himself and the Queen's Guard. They informed him that he had received commendations from the highest levels of command and that his actions were being held up as an example for other guards to follow. The story continued to gain momentum over the following days. Television news programs picked up the article and expanded on it, interviewing military experts, royal commentators, and ordinary citizens about the significance of the exchange. The consensus was clear. James Mitchell had demonstrated the kind of character and integrity that made the monarchy and the military institutions worth respecting and supporting. The autumn morning mist hung low over the grounds of Highgrove House as James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he thought would be another routine day. At 23 years old, James had been serving in the Queen's Guard for just 8 months, a dream he had harbored since childhood when he would watch the changing of the guard with his grandmother during their annual trips to London. James came from a working-class family in Manchester. His father worked double shifts at a textile factory while his mother cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. When James announced his intention to join the military and eventually the Queen's Guard, his parents were both proud and worried. The rigorous training, the discipline, and the honor that came with the position were everything James had hoped for. But nothing could have prepared him for what would happen on this particular Tuesday morning. The day started like any other. James had completed his morning inspection, his red tunic pressed to perfection, his bearskin hat positioned exactly as regulations demanded. He had been assigned to the outer perimeter of the royal residence, a position that required absolute attention and unwavering protocol. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves on the ancient oak trees had turned brilliant shades of gold and amber. Queen Camilla was scheduled to attend a charity event later that afternoon, something involving local children and a reading program she had been passionate about for years. The security briefing had been thorough, as always, covering every possible scenario and the proper protocols for each situation. James knew his role was to remain vigilant, professional, and, above all, to maintain the dignity and tradition that the Queen's Guard represented. As the morning progressed, James noticed increased activity around the main entrance. Staff members hurried back and forth, preparing for the Queen's departure. The head gardener was making last-minute adjustments to the flower arrangements that lined the walkway, while the household staff ensured everything was in perfect order. It was approaching 11 o'clock when James first caught sight of Queen Camilla emerging from the main residence. She was dressed elegantly in a navy blue coat with pearl accessories, her blonde hair styled impeccably as always. She moved with the grace and confidence that came from years of royal duties. But there was also something approachable about her demeanor that James had heard about, but never witnessed firsthand. The Queen was accompanied by two of her ladies-in-waiting and a small security detail. They were heading toward the waiting car that would transport her to the charity event. James maintained his position, standing at attention with his rifle held precisely as trained, his eyes focused straight ahead as protocol demanded. However, as the royal party approached his position, James noticed something that immediately caught his attention. Queen Camilla seemed to slow her pace, and, for a moment, her gaze appeared to settle on him. In that instant, James felt a mixture of honor and nervousness that he had never experienced during his months of service. What happened next would be recounted in newspapers, discussed in Parliament, and remembered as one of the most remarkable exchanges between royalty and a member of the Guard in recent memory. Queen Camilla stopped walking entirely, just a few feet away from where James stood. Her ladies-in-waiting paused as well, uncertain about the deviation from their planned route. The security detail remained alert but relaxed, as there was clearly no threat in the peaceful morning setting. "Young man," Queen Camilla said, her voice carrying the authority of her position but also a warmth that surprised James. "You've been standing there for quite some time, haven't you?" James felt his heart rate increase. Direct interaction with the royals during duty was not common, and he wasn't entirely sure of the proper protocol for this situation. He had been trained for many scenarios, but a casual conversation with the Queen Consort had not been covered in his instruction manual. "Yes, Your Majesty," James replied, his voice steady despite his internal nervousness. He maintained his rigid posture and forward gaze as he had been taught. Queen Camilla took a step closer, studying James with what appeared to be genuine concern. "How long have you been standing at attention this morning?" "Since 6 o'clock, Your Majesty," James answered truthfully. It had been nearly 5 hours, and although he was accustomed to long periods of standing, the formality and concentration required during royal presence made the time feel even longer. The Queen's expression shifted to one of maternal concern. She glanced at her ladies-in-waiting, then back at James. The autumn morning had grown warmer as the sun climbed higher, and standing in full ceremonial uniform under the increasingly bright sky was no small feat. 5 hours. Queen Camilla repeated, shaking her head slightly. "That's quite enough, I think." What she said next would shock not only James, but everyone present, and, eventually, the entire nation. "Sit down, boy," Queen Camilla said firmly but kindly. "You've earned a rest." The words hung in the air like autumn leaves caught in a sudden breeze. James felt as though time had stopped completely. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged glances of surprise, and even the security detail seemed taken aback by the unprecedented nature of the Queen's command. James found himself in an impossible situation. On one hand, he had been given a direct order by the Queen Consort, someone whose authority was unquestionable. On the other hand, everything he had been taught about military protocol, royal guard procedures, and ceremonial duty told him that sitting down while on duty was absolutely forbidden under any circumstances. His mind raced through his training, trying to find some precedent for this moment, some regulation that would guide his response. But there was nothing in the manual for this situation. He thought of his fellow guards, his commanding officers, and the centuries of tradition that he represented in his red tunic and bearskin hat. James also thought of his parents, who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities they never had. He thought of his grandmother, who had passed away just months before he achieved his dream of joining the Queen's Guard. She had always told him to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few seconds. Queen Camilla waited patiently, her eyes fixed on James with an expression of expectation mixed with understanding. She seemed to recognize the internal struggle he was facing. Finally, James made a decision that would define not only his career, but also his character in a way he could never have anticipated. His response would demonstrate a level of respectful courage and principled thinking that would capture the attention and admiration of people across the United Kingdom and beyond. The young guard took a deep breath, maintained his military bearing, and prepared to give an answer that would surprise everyone present, including the Queen herself. His response would reveal the kind of person he truly was beneath the ceremonial uniform, and it would set in motion a series of events that would change his life forever. As James opened his mouth to speak, he had no way of knowing that this moment would be remembered as a defining example of integrity, respect, and the complex relationship between duty and conscience. His answer would resonate far beyond the grounds of Highgrove House, touching the hearts of people who valued both tradition and human decency. The stage was set for a response that would not only stun Queen Camilla but would also become a story told and retold as an example of what it means to honor both authority and principle in equal measure.